The following is a rebroadcast of a program that was originally presented live on November 13th, 1989.
Major funding for the following program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television and the Des Moines Register. From the studios of Iowa Public Television, Student Voices, Student Choices. Here's your host, Tina Yothers.
Hi, and welcome to Student Voices, Student Choices. In this program, we'll discuss another issue important to today's teenagers. This year, 2,000 to 5,000 children across the country will die by circumstances in which child abuse or maltreatment is suspected. This year, nearly 2 million children are kicked, punched, and bitten by their parents. This year, between 60 and 100,000 children will be sexually abused. And that's the topic, child abuse. We'll talk about the different types of abuse that go on and find out that to be informed is one way that we can combat this problem. We'll begin our program today with some original poetry on child abuse.
My feelings. My feelings are important to me, and they are my dreams, and they are to be respected by me and others around me. My feelings make me what I am, me, and I love myself for what I feel inside and out.
The man. The feelings we shared could be nothing less. I never thought it could happen this way. I thought he loved me dearly. As it turned out, he had another girl than just me. We were going through a lot of tough times. One day it just popped out, the feeling of loneliness. It felt as if there was no one else in my life. He destroyed me deeply and emotionally. What would happen if I had someone else in my life? Will the same thing happen? I will always hate him for that. My life has been destroyed from a stupid, lousy guy that was really no good from the beginning.
Where are the children? Where are the children? What has happened to them? They are my kin. Who is with them? Who took my mother's children? They are gone from here. The babies were in their pen, and then, oh dear, are they alive? Oh, how I fear they were only 5, but yet so dear. Where are the children?
Innocence. I still get flashbacks of what you did, taking advantage of an innocent kid, making me feel so ashamed inside. I wanted to go far away and hide, so scared to let anyone know, just letting my tears slowly flow, wanting and hoping it would end. Maybe then the inside of me could mend. Those awful memories are with me still, forever scarring me, they will.
Thank you. On today's program, we'll answer questions about child abuse from our studio audience and from 6 school phone centers from around the state. Now, to help me answer these questions are Larry Brown, the Executive Director of the American Humane Association in Denver, Colorado. Jean Hartgrave, founder of Parents Anonymous in Cedar Rapids. Pat Tracy, a survivor of abuse and co-facilitator with Parents United. And Jeannie Beardsley, a mental health specialist who works with abused children. Thank you. Now, before I join our studio for their questions, I'd like to begin with a question. At what age is a child most likely to be abused?
Well, that's a good question, and as a matter of fact, it can happen at any age. There are state laws in every state which define child abuse as anything that happens to a child between the ages of birth and 18. And from national reporting data, which incidentally last year involved over 2 million official reports of child neglect and child abuse, the median age of children involved was age 7.2, a little over 7. But it can happen at any time in child, and there are various kinds of child abuse, and sometimes it starts early and goes on and on and on, so that it's difficult to tie it down to a specific age because it runs the whole range of childhood. How's it look in Iowa?
Well, about the same, Larry. It's around age 7, and it's important to remember that just because it's reported at age 7 and substantiated doesn't mean that that's when it started. It can start with newborns and go on right up through ages 18.
A lot of people, they think, well, now that I'm 15, I've got it made, I'm not going to be abused. But it can happen when you're 15, it can start when you're 15, it can happen anytime in a child's life. You have a question?
Yeah, I want to know if child abuse is more occurred by parents in a high amount of stress jobs, and if the stress has a lot to do with child abuse and them beating their children.
I think stress certainly adds to it. If you're in high-stress jobs, if you happen to have been employed, lose a job, I think certainly any stress in your life are going to become stressors you take down on your children. I think another strong indicator is we definitely know we're in a cycle. That if I was an abused child, I am apt to abuse my children, so we definitely know. There's lots of indicators. I certainly think stress is one of them, and cycle.
Yeah, but that's really no excuse. I don't think there's an excuse for child abuse. You know, they could blame it on work and stress, but I don't think that's an excuse. Okay, we're going to go to a phone center first at Remsen Union High School.
What can be done to stop child abuse before it actually happens?
That's a very interesting question, and it's kind of complicated as well. I think we have to, first of all, make sure that parents know how to be parents, that we've got to make it difficult for people to be so ignorant about parenting. We also need to make it difficult for kids to be so vulnerable. Sometimes children do not understand and do not realize what's happening to them and how wrong it is. And we've also got to make it difficult for families to live in neighborhoods and communities where people don't do something about it when they see it going on. So that those are some of the things. I think there are probably many more.
There are a number of prevention programs for kids, too, in all areas of abuse. Sometimes we can target kids that we think might be high risk, and there are prevention programs just for those kids. In Iowa, the Department of Human Services is mandated to have prevention programs for the schools.
Okay, we have an audience question.
My question is directed toward Pat. How did you survive how did you get over the child abuse?
I was abused at an early age, and after the abuse stopped, I turned to drugs and alcohol. And I never told anybody about my abuse until 5 months ago, and that's after 17 years of drug and alcohol abuse, severe drug and alcohol abuse. It was then in a treatment center that I was introduced to Parents United, and through the group therapy and stuff, it's brought me around. It showed me that there's other people with the same problems, and I shared a lot with them.
Okay, we have another question.
How do you determine if it's child abuse or if it's just punishment?
Are you talking about physical abuse?
Yeah.
Okay. If we want to talk about the law has very specific criteria for child abuse. So it may be determined by bruises or lacerations or whatever. The other thing that we need to remember, too, is that just because someone doesn't have bruises or lacerations or broken bones doesn't mean that they haven't been abused. And that's where the difference between maybe a legal definition of child abuse comes in, or where a child may define themselves as being abused. My rule of thumb is if a child tells me I was abused, they were abused, and we'll take it from there.
I think it's important also to recognize that there's a difference between an abusive incident and an abusive parent. That I think all parents have done things and said things to their kids that they wish they could take back, and that were perhaps wrong and abusive. But when you see a pattern evolving, when it becomes something of repetitive duration, or increasing severity, and goes on, then I think that's part of the fine line between discipline and abuse.
But talking in the book terms, parents don't realize what abuse is on a child. You know, they think if I'm not giving my kids a black eye, then I'm not abusing my kids. There's a lot of things that go along with child abuse. Okay, we have a question.
What do you attribute to the raise in the reported sexual abuse cases?
I think in Iowa and probably elsewhere it's because we're educating people. Hopefully, we're starting very, very young with our kids, that they own their bodies, they have an ownership of their bodies, they have a right and perhaps as they get older, responsibility to talk about that. We need to start very young with our kids on body ownership and body safety and talk about it.
Education is the best way to learn anything. Okay, we have a question right here in the audience.
Yes, who usually reports child abuse?
Well, on a national level, it runs about 50% are professionals, that are people who are mandated to report it under the reporting laws. These are medical personnel, law enforcement, social services, school teachers, people whose job, daycare personnel, people whose job it is to take care and be around children. The other half basically are friends and neighbors, relatives, acquaintance, people in the community, and there's even a small portion that are self-referred. That is, individuals who are being abused themselves reach out and seek help. So it runs about, you know, if you could say maybe 10% are schools, come out of the schools. You must realize that half of the child abuse comes to school-age children, so that's sometimes the first contact. Another 10% or so comes out of law enforcement. People call the police when they become aware of it. Another 10% is probably in the area of social service agencies, counseling services, those kinds of things. But a lot of it comes from just ordinary people who happen to know, who see something going on that's wrong, and they want something done about it, and they pick up the phone. They care enough to pick up the phone and make a report.
A lot of the times, kids are afraid of messing up their families if they tell on their parents, and that's their main fear, of messing up their family. They don't want to do that. So if you are being abused, you don't have to stand for it. You don't have to deal with that. You can get help. So don't forget that. Okay, we have a phone question from Davis County High School in Bloomfield.
Do you think that there is an increase in child abuse, or are just more cases being reported lately?
There's a difference of opinion even within the professionals in Iowa. I don't think it's any more prevalent. I think it's just being reported more, that as we become more sophisticated in how we do investigations, and as more people become educated, there are going to be more reports.
Okay, we have an audience question.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, can the psychological damage or the abuse be more damaging than the actual physical abuse?
I personally think it can be. I would certainly never downplay a physical abuse. You know, a broken arm will heal. You can look at an x-ray and see a broken arm. A broken mind and spirit is very difficult, even in counseling. You know, Pat talked about he had to become an adult and go through several trips to treatment centers before he could deal with it. So I personally think it's much more damaging.
Okay.
Why does society as a whole seem to deny this problem? I mean, we always, you know, there's a lot of people out there who don't know about it, and they say, well, gosh, that doesn't happen in my area, it's only in the slums.
You find that in a lot of problems. People in other neighborhoods don't want to deal or don't want to see that these things are going on. And that's why group homes and group facilities and social workers do all the work that they can, because it is everywhere, whether you want to deny it or not. I think everyone has people in their families that have problems, but maybe they don't want to deal with them, but that's their problem. But there are people like this who do deal with it and are making a difference.
One of the problems, too, is that there's such a taboo against child abuse. And a taboo doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. A taboo means that it does happen, but it's so sensitive and it goes against the grain so much that we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to deal with it, and we're afraid of it.
Okay, we have a question.
Which parent do you think abuses their children more, the mom or the dad?
I think probably the mom. Keep in mind, we talked about stressors earlier. A lot of most single parent homes are headed by females, by moms. So statistically that will prove true. I think in a two-parent family, perhaps the mom spends more time with the child. So, you know, I don't know. Larry's the statistician of it, but that's my feelings on it.
I think you're quite right. I think national data will show, for the very reasons that you mentioned, that it's more often involving women than men, although you can't make a definitive decision about that because there are other circumstances that relate to that piece of information.
When you're treating a child that's been abused, how do you get them to open up and tell you what was going on?
That takes a lot of time, lots of times, and sometimes it depends on the age of the child too. Even with little kids that are nonverbal, they can play with toys and they can show you through toys. They can show you through their artwork. With older kids, a lot of times, once it starts to come out, once it starts to bubble up, it just sort of goes on. And kids do well in groups. When they're able to talk in groups about what happened to them, it becomes much easier. And eventually they find out that talking about the abuse is kind of like putting peanut butter on toast. It gets to be easier as time goes along.
And they see that there are kids with the similar problems. They, usually when it's happening to them, they feel, gosh, I'm the only one with this problem, no one's going to understand. But when they get in a group and they start talking about it, it becomes much easier. Okay, you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering what type of treatment do you use for the abuse of children, and how effective is it for both the children and the parents?
For abusive children or the abused child?
Yes, and the parents also. How effective is it?
Are you saying the child who has been abused and the parents?
Yeah.
What I found out is I've worked in different areas, and if there's a comprehensive treatment program for the entire family, where the issue is seen as how to treat the whole family, that everyone in the family is in a lot of pain and they need a lot of help. If the whole family is treated, that's very successful. Oftentimes what happens is that if there's not a comprehensive program where everyone can be involved, maybe just the child is involved, the rest of the family is in a lot of pain too. And they're kind of stuck, and sometimes that doesn't work very well.
Okay, we have a phone question from Essex Junior High School. Hello.
What are the statistics of children who are abused by alcoholic or drug-addicted parents to those who are abused by non-alcoholic or non-drug-addicted parents?
Well, I think there's no question that's a contributing factor very often. I don't know if you all heard the question. It had to do with alcoholism. It's a contributing factor, but I think it's also sometimes used as an excuse, as a way of loosening up somebody's inhibitions about striking out or about being open. And so they verbally assault their children, sexually or physically assault their children while under the influence of alcohol. But I'm not sure it's a significant, that our data show that it's a major significant contributing force to the problem. It's there, but that's about it.
Okay. I have a question.
I've heard that a lot of parents who abuse their children or abuse children themselves, and if that's so, why do they want to put their own children through the same horror that they had to go through?
They don't know any other way.
Keep in mind that you learn to parent one place. When I went to school, we would have never done a program like this. You talk about being a stigma now, it would never have been talked about. You learn to parent at home. And I can remember when I was the abused child, I would swear to myself, this will never, ever, ever happen. I'm going to grow up and become, Mother Mary, Queen of Mothers. But as you get into stress, as you get into life, it's just like an old VCR tape that comes forward, and no matter how much you fight it, it comes out until you learn to deal with your own background and deal with what happened to you.
It's a vicious cycle that's going to keep going until someone educates the kids and educates them and tells them a different way of life, because that's the only way they know. Okay, we have a question.
Why does it seem that in a lot of the abuse situations, the social worker will go in and try to help, but they mainly focus on keeping the family together rather than protecting the child and getting them out of the home?
Well, in some cases it's that way. They do that because there aren't enough places to send the kids, I think. I mean,
I'll just address Iowa. In Iowa, the expectation is that our ultimate goal is to reunite the family. Sometimes that gets lost, and I agree with you. There have been times when there was so much emphasis on putting the family back together again that the kids got lost in the shuffle. And I think that we have tried over the past few years to redefine that and to say it's not the most important thing in putting the family back together again. If the child is in danger, the main thing we have to be concerned about is the child. So we've tried to shift gears and get back into being focused on the child.
It is the child's safety is the most important of all when they look at the problem.
I think you're exactly right. And I think that there's a lot of public attention, a lot of publicity to the cases where it looks like the system has acted wrongly in trying to protect a child. But the first goal of Child Protective Services has got to be protecting the children. And I think also that the system has learned that if at all possible, the way to rescue a kid is to rescue his family. Kids themselves will kind of tell us that you know, it's very important, if that's possible, to restore the family.
Okay, we have a question. What happens to the brothers and sisters that abuse their younger brothers and sisters?
Well, once again, in Iowa, you need to understand that even in Iowa, it may change from one county to another. It may change from one judicial district to another. So in some parts of the state that I've worked, children who abuse other children, that is just seen as another child abuse investigation done by the Department of Human Services. In other areas of the state that I've worked, the Department of Human Services does not do those investigations. That's left up to law enforcement. So that's one of the things that the legislature and I was looking at right now, is how to straighten that up so that the department is involved, because when children are abusing children, there are at least 2 children that need help badly.
Okay, we have a phone question from Harris Lake Park High School. Hello.
Yes, I would like to ask Pat a question. How bad was the abuse towards you that resulted in drugs and alcohol? And secondly, what was your feelings towards those who abused you?
The abuse was from a priest, and it affected my feelings towards God and stuff. And later on in life, I had a lot of trouble believing in God. And it wasn't until I went through my last treatment I started to learn about a higher power and respect that. What was the other part?
What do you think about your perpetrator?
Yes, I think about my perpetrator a lot, and especially after 20 years. I'd never told anybody about my abuse for 20 years until the last treatment. And I've only been in with Parents United for the last 5 months. It's a real hard issue. I'd like to see something done. I like to see something done right now, but the statute of limitations is already up on it.
It's a tough issue, and I think the problem here is that many times the person who perpetrates abuse is a person that someone trusts. As in your situation, Pat, it was a priest. It could be a scoutmaster. It could be a school teacher. That it often starts with a trusting, dependent authority relationship, and then evolves into child abuse.
These kind of people, they look for jobs, and they'll take years out of their lives to get close to children and get the relationship as close as some people can be, and then they'll make their move, you know? Okay, wait.
Do kids being abused blame themselves?
Across the board. Across the board. I don't know if I have ever worked with a child that did not blame themselves at some level. They might say, when I first start working with them, they might say, I knew it wasn't my fault. But it doesn't take very long before I start picking up on, somehow or another, that child is still blaming themselves for what happened. If I had only said something different, if I hadn't worn that outfit, if I had minded better, if I hadn't caused my parents marital problems, if I hadn't spent that money, it just goes on and on. So that's a process, and probably in treatment, blaming themselves is one of the very last things to go.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the situation, when a child reports that the child is being abused, they take the child from the home, they put him into a facility that isn't so nice most of the time, and it is like they committed a crime. They're going to like a jail. So they do feel that it was their problem. Okay.
My name's Corey Cook from Storm Lake, and I was wondering that with a higher education, do you have less child abuse, or with a lower education, do you have more?
Well, with when they're in the facility, the education is enforced when your words of the court. I don't know what the factors are with.
Corey, are you talking about the parents or the abuser? There are no economic boundaries. It has nothing to do with economics. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with religion, ethnic group. Abuses across the board.
Do like richer people have more tendency to get off? I mean, like if they go to court since they're rich and.
I don't know what the statistics are.
I don't have any hard data on that, Corey, but there is some sense that that's true. People with a lot of resources can get good legal and medical protection and advice and services that are not always available to the underclass or the poor.
Yeah. Okay, we have a phone call again from Smart Junior High School in Davenport.
This is a question directed towards Ms. Beardsley. Is there anything that can be done to judges who abuse children and put them back into the abused home, knowing that the child will be abused again?
Tina, would you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was lost on that. Did you say, do they get put back into the homes?
Yes.
Not usually. I don't think right away. They may if there's some counseling done or what.
If there's a comprehensive program set up, or if there's an understanding in the area about how child abuse cases will be handled, if the perpetrator will leave the home and make a commitment that they're not going to come back, and if the court's behind that and says, you cannot come back into the home because your child is going to remain there, and if you have a parent or you have a caretaker that you can trust is going to protect the child, then chances are the child gets to remain in the home and the offender is the one to leave. Unfortunately, in some areas where there's not an understanding or a treatment program set up, what happens is the child has to be removed because the offender is still there. Hopefully, I hope that children aren't being sent back to homes where they're going to be abused again. I know that happens sometimes. It does happen.
Well, they're taken out of the homes and you know, the parents get to them and they say, well, if you just tell them that you want to come back home and you tell them that it was a mistake, it'll make the family much better. And people, they don't want to mess up their families. Okay.
I have a friend that's abused, and I was wondering how to go about helping her.
Listen to her.
Yeah.
Encourage her to get help. Encourage her to talk to someone, and someone that she trusts, that she can go to and say, I really need help with this. Will you stand beside me? And my experience has been is that abuse doesn't stop. Children can't make the abuse stop. There has to be outside intervention. There has to be someone who's able to come in and make the abuse stop. Once again, it gets back to, remember when we were talking about how kids have a tendency to blame themselves? Sometimes kids think like this, well, I caused the abuse so I can make it stop. Well, that's not accurate. The children didn't cause the abuse and they can't make it stop. So that's when we need help from the outside. So talk to someone you trust or get on the telephone. Kids can get on the telephone themselves and call hotlines. Talk to a counselor at school, talk to your doctor, a teacher that you trust.
Anyway. Okay, Jane, you wanted to say something about that? Did you have some?
I was just going to say that, the most important thing is to listen, try to understand, although sometimes that's very difficult. Steer them toward a trusted counselor at school. Schools are usually very good at that. Steer them toward somebody, but the main thing is to be there through that whole thing with them and for them.
Okay, we have an audience question.
What's the most common abuse in Iowa?
Physical abuse is the most common abuse in Iowa. The most reported abuse in Iowa. We're paying more and more attention to emotional abuse right now, too.
Okay. We're going to go to a phone center. Remsen Union High School.
Okay. If a girl becomes pregnant by incest, what will happen to the child?
That's that girl's decision, just like it's a decision of any girl who becomes pregnant. Mm-hmm. There are some other issues that have to be taken in at that point. But, I think that's going to come right down that is her decision, and she needs to make a very difficult decision with the proper counselor to help her through that. But it's no different than any other.
I've seen a lot of girls doing the work that I do with child abuse, 11 years old, that have been sexually abused by their parents, uncles, friends, that became pregnant, and it's not a pretty thing, and it's happening all the time.
Is there really more cases of child abuse, or is people just starting to talk about it now?
I think the child abuse has been around forever. It's just more people are getting involved and more people are getting educated on it. Larry?
Well, I think you're right, Tina. The farther you go back in history, the more dangerous it was to be a child. But I think we're all aware that there's more and more of it being reported. That's because we're getting better at identifying it, talking about it. Social service agencies have established hotlines throughout the country. Actually, the reporting has gone up over 200% in the last 10 years. And it's a better system. I think probably there may be some indications that there's actually more of it because of the society we live in and all the changes we have to deal with.
And
it's a combination of both of those
People
things.
realize that there's help out there too now that they didn't before, and I think that's really important.
Yeah. Oh, and there's all these organizations, you know, around. You're not going to stand for some of the problems that you have, and you're going to tell someone about it. So that's why, once again, you thank these organizations that are around for the children.
What is the penalty for the non-abusing parent who's afraid to intervene?
In Iowa, they can be charged with failure to protect, which is very difficult. Keep in mind that our goal is not to incarcerate parents. Our goal is to work with people. You don't learn parenting in Fort Madison jail in Iowa. Keep in mind that that's true, that we work with the entire family.
Jane, why don't you tell us about Parents Anonymous?
We're an organization of people, all parents, who are sharing, caring, loving, accepting, non-judging. If any parent thinks they're under stress, they can call any Parents Anonymous group in the country, talk with them about their stress. You can do that by coming to groups. There's usually groups every week in our communities. If you're not ready to do that yet, do a telephone contact for a while. But the main thing is that when you go to a group, much like any anonymous group, there are other people there who have had the same hurts, who are hurting the same way you are, who are non-judging, and because they have been there and felt that pain, they can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another phone question from North Iowa High School in Buffalo Center.
Hi, this is Marsha Kwame, and we would like to know why in a family of more than one child, does the parent single out just one of the child to abuse?
Jane, do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of times what I have seen is the child is either conceived as being different, or they truly are different. Handicapped children, mentally or physically handicapped children, are very high potential for abuse because they take more energy, more time, they're more frustrating. Perhaps it's a child that was meant to save a marriage and failed at doing that. So I see it as a child who is either truly different, the family perceives as being different, or a child who did not live up to parents' expectations.
Right. And I'd like to add to that as far as sexually abused kids, too. At one time we thought that probably only one child in the family was being sexually abused, and what we found out over the years is that it's more likely that other children in the family are being abused, too. We just don't know it.
Well, the older child is usually threatened that if you don't do something, then we'll get your younger sister or your younger brother.
Which happens anyway.
Yeah, right.
It's just a threat.
But they're being threatened anyway. Okay, we have a question.
What brings on sexual abuse between parents and their children, or adults and kids?
That is very complicated. For every offender out there, there's probably a different reason. If it were very easy to explain, it'd be very easy for us to work with and for people to recover. Jean's already talked a little bit about stress, but there are so many different things that go into it. We call it, those of us who work a lot in the field, a lot of us refer to it as the offender's love map, which means what they've experienced as children, what they've learned as children, what they've observed, what they've read. So everything ties into this. It's not just one thing.
Also, it's a power issue, I think, a lot. There's a power, over the child, and that's something that's really hard to deal with.
Okay, we have a phone question.
Yeah, what should you do if you know someone who is getting abused, and if you report it or tell someone, it could ruin your friendship?
Those are the alternatives that you have to look at, and those are the choices that you have to think what is more important.
Usually by the time someone starts telling friends, they're ready for it to come out. They want it to come out. They may say, please don't tell, but that's their own feelings about, I don't want my family to hurt, and I'm afraid that what I'm doing is the wrong thing. But when we hear kids starting to talk about abuse, we know that down deep inside, they're ready for it to come out. They're ready to deal with it.
When they start telling you and start depending on someone, then they're not going to, you know, they may hate you when you tell someone in charge, but they'll love you later.
I personally went ahead and I dropped clues to like my older brother, you know, what was going on, and he, you know, they seemed obvious to me, but they were small to him, you know, and he didn't pick up on it. And you know, a lot of things you will drop clues, and I wanted to be found out. And when it wasn't, I felt more trapped.
Okay, we're going to go to a phone question. Davis County High School in Bloomfield.
Okay, because there are so many programs to increase the awareness of child abuse, has there been an increase of foundless cases?
And
Larry?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
She said that since there are so many programs and so many shows that are dealing with the issue of child abuse, are there any more
substantiated
child abuse going on? Did you find any? I'm sorry.
Well, many of the programs, the television network programs that deal with the subject of child abuse generally have also a panel of experts or counselors available to take phone calls. There are a couple of organizations that are involved in those kinds of backup after the show kind of situations, and the calls do come in. It seems like people are understanding that it's okay to ask for help, that it's really the only thing to do is to get some help if you possibly can. Talk to somebody about it. So it does increase immediately after one of those shows.
Okay, we have a question.
What happens to the parents after they abuse the child? Do they come back in 6 months and go with the child again, maybe abuse them again, or go to prison, or what?
Well, I don't think the jail term is as long as it should be in most cases, but I'll let you handle this. Jeannie?
I'm sorry.
Jeannie, anyway.
You know, you have to realize these people are abusing their children, and I'm not excusing anyone, because they don't know any better. I have done some work in Fort Madison and Anamosa State prisons here in Iowa, and you don't learn parenting in prison. You know, I would like to see rehab programs where they're not incarcerated, where we can keep families at least in touch with each other. Realistically, if we get into serious crimes, prison time's it. But that's not going to take it.
There are a lot of distinctions, it seems to me, that you have to factor into this. Clearly, some families are beyond treatment, and there is no way to reconcile or restore that family. But many families are within the realm of treatment. Their abuse and neglect is based on ignorance, their own personal incapacity, and there are treatment programs that can help those folks, and we should do that if we can. That should be the goal.
You know, a lot of times when the parent is in jail, they write to the children that they abused, and they say, oh gosh, well, I've changed, and I've turned to the Lord, and I'm going to turn my life around, and I want you to accept me back in your life, just to get back onto their good side. And it happens all the time, and it's very sad for the children to not accept their parents. Okay.
When there's a husband that abuses his wife, are the children always affected in a negative way? Or can they sometimes get out of the house without having severe effects? Or
Even if they get out of the house, if you have violence in the family, it's affecting that entire family. Those kids are affected. If they're never struck, if they're not actually involved in the physical assaults, those kids are affected very severely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a phone question from Essex Senior High School.
Right. How many children of divorced parents are abused each year?
How many parents of abused children are...
Divorced parents.
How many children of divorced parents are abused each year?
I don't think I can answer that question. I would just assume, I don't recall the exact data, but I would assume that it's a significant stress factor that's creating problems for a lot of families. Separation and divorce creates problems.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't always result in child abuse. I think that's important to make that distinction. I don't know what the actual number is.
Okay.
What should you look for to identify child abuse in any age?
I don't think we have long enough to really, if we had all afternoon, there are lots of indications, but you know, there's also a dichotomy with kids, too, that you can say just because someone's grades are failing, that doesn't mean that that's an indicator, because an abused child might be getting straight A's to compensate for how they're feeling about being abused. You know, I can't succeed at home, but by golly, I'm going to succeed here at school. Some kids are getting into trouble, so that may be an indicator. On the other hand, some kids become very, very quiet and are very compliant and do exactly what they're told. So those of us who are in the profession, we would love to be able to say, okay, if we have 25 out of 30, this child meets 25 out of 30 of the criteria, we know this child's been abused. That's not the way it is.
You can never tell.
You cannot tell.
I think it was interesting, though, that Pat indicated he tried to tell, but people didn't hear it. And I think that's true, that a lot of times kids are giving signals and messages by their behavior, by what they say, and those of us around them, it just sails right by us. We got to be more sensitive and aware about that possibility.
I was real disruptive in school, like, you know, your hellraiser and this, and I was the, you know, class clown, and I tried to get attention other places and stuff. And it was, and I couldn't deal with other kids very well, a lot of fights and things like this. And then it was when I turned to the drugs, you know, I just kind of separated from everybody and everything, separated myself, and what I was feeling, just medicated my feelings.
We also know that statistically that 80 to 80% of girls who run away have been sexually abused, and probably in their own home. We also know that about the same statistically of kids who are chemically dependent have been abused. So, you know, those are kind of some indicators too, but that's not proof. That doesn't mean that it happened.
Okay, we have an audience question.
It seems that the physical abuse is more predominantly brought to attention, but what about the severe verbal abuse? How is a child counseled into that? Is it the same as physical abuse?
It's effective, but, you know,
is the counseling the same?
For verbal abuse than it is for physical abuse?
Yes. Yeah, because basically you're dealing with a lot of the same issues, anger and power and, you know, demeaning kids. So it's a lot of the same kind of issues.
Okay, we're going to go to a phone question from Harris Lake Park High School.
What are the characteristics other than stress of parenting of parents that abuse, and is it hereditary?
It's a cycle. Do you want to handle this, Jane?
Well, it is a cycle, but the cycle can be broken. It doesn't mean that if a person has been abused, they're automatically going to grow up and be an abuser. It's a risk and it's a problem for them, that can be overcome. Right. There are a lot of causes. I think you have children raising children. Ignorance. I've been impressed over my experience with how often somebody will say, I meant to hit him, but I didn't mean to knock him down the stairs. Or how vulnerable the children are. Babies, parents who will spank babies for crying. I mean, they just don't understand how risky and how vulnerable that is. Their own needs are so great that they're really, you know, they want the children to meet their needs rather than recognizing my job as a parent is to take care of the children. There's just, you add stress and you add, you know, separation and divorce, inadequate parenting in their own background. It's a broad basis of possibilities that contribute to the fact that some people are out of control. They cannot get control in their lives, and the children are there and become the victims.
It's not hereditary. It's not hereditary.
I'm glad you said that.
There's, when you said babies raising babies, when they're in the system, you know, they're being raised in the system of a county or the state. A lot of girls, they get pregnant, and they have a baby just so they have something to love and something to hold on to, and that's a likely story when they're in the system. And they're not yet reached by these groups and not educated on how to raise their baby and how to live a normal life. So these are the ones that do live in the system and do raise their kids the same way.
That's very interesting, Tina, because we have to take lessons to drive a car, but we don't have to learn how to be a parent. The most important thing most of us will ever do. There's very, very little training and preparation for it, and too many of us are amateurs. Right. And when you get into trouble, you reach back and you deal with your kids the way you were dealt with. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that was a good experience and you make it. If you're not so lucky, you reach back and there's nothing there. Exactly. And then you strike out.
And people are scared to ask too, you know. These like when they're the mother or something, and they go ask, it proves to them that they'll feel like they're inadequate, and I think that's something that they have to really look at.
Okay, we have an audience question.
Okay, how do the abusers justify to themselves what they're doing? I mean, like the priest situation, I'm Catholic. I can't understand why a priest would do that.
No, see, I'm Catholic too. We can't say that it's just the priest. He noted earlier that it's in every field.
And well, how do they justify themselves for doing that? I mean, so it makes them feel like they're not doing.
People who abuse tell themselves a lot of lies because most people who abuse children feel just awful about what they're doing. They don't know how to make it stop. So they try to rationalize what they're doing by saying, things like, I couldn't help what I was doing because the same thing happened to me, or I was drunk, that's why it happened, or the child was naughty and so I was punishing them, or the list of rationalizations goes on and on and on, but that's part of what they're dealing with down deep inside as far as trying to figure out an answer. If I can figure out why I did this, then maybe I can make it stop. So the rationalizations can take all kinds of different routes.
Well, obviously he didn't believe in anything he taught to do a thing like that. Okay, we're going to go to a phone center from Smart Junior High School in Davenport.
We had an incident in our family concerning sexual abuse, and I was wondering why the molester didn't get a stiffer charge other than community work and rehabilitation meetings, which he did not complete. Is that a typical penalty for the abuser, or who can one go to if the charges aren't being followed through?
That depends on the area that you're in. If you have a good program in your area, and I can't remember the area where you called from. Davenport. If you have, there should be a probation officer, there should be a juvenile court officer involved. The therapist that's involved with the family can report back to the probation officer if the person isn't following through on the expectation. But once again, one of the comments that we want to stress is that all the punishment in the world is not going to stop someone from abusing a child. The only way it's going to stop is if they get treatment, if they get help. That's what makes it stop.
Okay, we have a question from the audience.
This is a question for anybody. What were your personal motives for helping abused children?
Larry, do you want to?
Well, I started out as a Methodist minister, and then decided I wanted to get into social work, so I became a social worker when I was about 25 years old, and I've been a child welfare worker for most of my life. It was just my interest in helping people, I guess, more than anything else.
Pat, what are your motives?
It's a lot of times, like working with adolescents that I do, I see the growth in them and stuff, and the questions that they ask, and I see a lot of the healing that's done and stuff, and it's really, it feels good to be a part of something good.
You see yourself in them.
I see a lot of myself. We've talked at a care facility one time, and the adolescent boys that were there, ranged from 12 to 18, I think, or something, and when we were there, I'd look out, and the questions that they asked and the pain I seen on their faces reminded me of the pain that I had. And it was really felt good to do something good.
Okay, we have a question in the audience.
What would be the processes for a child seeking help from child abuse? Would there be counseling, family counseling, even though there's fear of one of the parents that did it?
That's the decision that goes along with it. I think you have to make up your mind whether you want to deal with it or you want to leave it the way it is.
A lot of times the way it's handled is that the children are not in counseling with the person who abused in the beginning, that it takes time. It takes time for the child to get feeling better about themselves. It takes time for the person who abused to understand what their behavior is all about. And then eventually, the family starts working together again to put the family back together again, and that may take a long time. It may take up to 2 years just for that to happen. So, but there is a lot of fear, with kids. Well, gee, if I get this started, then I'm going to be thrown into counseling tomorrow, and I'm going to have to deal with this with the whole family. Mm-hmm. And that does not need to happen that way.
Okay, we're going to go to a phone question in North Iowa High School in Buffalo Center.
Does pornography contribute to the increase of child abuse?
That's just like saying that rock music causes a lot of deaths. I think if a person commits a crime like that, then that's in their mind anyway. I don't think any pictures or any, it may, I don't know what the statistics are on that.
I haven't seen any hard statistics that prove it one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of concern about it.
Mm-hmm. But it's like I said, it's just like the people that think rock and roll music causes a lot of suicides. I don't think it's in anything that they're promoting. Okay, we're going to go to questions in the audience.
Yes, we've seen a lot of highly publicized cases in the last 5 years. What I'd like to know is, are these the majority of them, or are they just like the tip of the iceberg?
I think it's the tip of the iceberg. What gets the publicity are the most severe, brutal assaults on children. That's the kind of stuff that makes news. Our analysis is that those severe abuse cases represent, and we've been gathering data at American Humane for over 10 years, the most severe, when you think of child abuse, you think of the battered child, the severe, brutal, sadistic attack on a child. Those kinds of things are the representatively small, maybe 5% of what gets officially reported. Emotional abuse is much greater. That doesn't make the news. Sexual abuse is much greater. That's making the news more and more, but that's running 15 to 18% of all types of maltreatment. Neglect is the #1 type of maltreatment that's reported. More than half of the cases that are reported are various kinds of neglect, and more children die from neglect than from abuse, which is kind of surprising. They're drinking the bleach and falling off the balconies and running in front of cars. Lack of supervision and lack of care. They're growing up in homes which is just not safe. And so neglect is really but what you see in the paper and in the media is most often the severe, brutal child abuse, physical child abuse cases, and that represents a relatively small part. When I said a minute ago, those people who do those kinds of brutal things to kids may be beyond the reach of help. It's the other family that, maybe 25% of the abuse is minor physical injury. Something's wrong, but it's not the major kind of a problem.
And it's also, in the news, you see the numbers growing. Mm-hmm. So, it's just something that's such a big issue, and I'm really glad that we're doing a show on it. Okay, I'm sorry we've run out of time. I would like to thank our panel, Larry, Jean, Pat, and Jeannie. Thank you guys for sharing some of your experiences in this matter. There are many ways that we can express what we feel, and one of the most lyric ways is through poetry. Here again are our readers sharing with us their personal experiences.
Drummer in the dark. Oh, drummer, why do you beat your drum in the dark night? What's wrong, or should I say what is right? I hear the pitter-patter of your feet, and I hear the beat of your drum. It wears on into the dark night. So many times I have wanted to ask, why? Why do you stay in the dark and beat away on your drum? Now I know you lost everything, and I know you want everyone to know that you are important and that you too need love, even in the dark. Oh, drummer in the dark, don't worry, I know you're there. And yes, I love your precious outcry for love, and I'll come to your rescue to help you through that night. That way we'll never be in the dark. We'll be together in the precious light.
A cry for help. I was just a little girl who thought the world of you, only you made it into something and made sure no one ever knew. I kept that awful secret in me, as you often told me to do. You would always threaten, no one will believe it's true. You took away my childhood with your disgusting lust. I felt dirty and ashamed, but who could I trust? Desperately wanting to stop what you were doing to me, but you were right when you said no one would set me free. I moved on to high school. You weren't around me as much, but it didn't stop those awful stares, or those thoughts, even your touch. I never thought it would end until one day it came out. You weren't so careful and smart. We were given the benefit of the doubt. Again I told my story. This time I let it go. I was going to make you pay, and people were going to know. Hours after hours I sat and remembered. I felt like I was going to die. I was so scared and so confused. All of my feelings were mixed up inside. The next time I saw you was the day of your trial. You had to plead guilty. There was no chance for denial. You go on the witness stand, your story you begin to tell. All I could do was sit there and hope to God you go to hell. You said you had been a victim. Pain was a feeling you knew well. So why didn't you get help? You're just trying to make your story sell. Your words are, I'm sorry I hurt you. It wasn't an apology. Not to me. I could never forgive you. It scarred me forever, can't you see? 6 months is your sentence. That's almost the same as none. You should have had more. It's not fair. Justice wasn't done. I need to stay strong and try to survive, just for my sake. I've got to go on and try to heal. It's a chance I'm willing to take.
Daddy and me, together forever, never to part. Special love, straight from the heart. He's always close to keep me from harm. He's so handsome, so full of charm. No boyfriend could be as special as he. Together forever, Daddy and me.
Thank you very much. Okay, we also have a poem written by Pat.
Listen, my friends. Listen, my friends, and please listen well. I've been sick and demented. I've been living in hell. There's been loved ones I've stepped on, turned their hearts from within. God, I pray now for peace. Please let me live once again. My life's been an illusion. Myself I must find. God, grant me my serenity. I can't see. I feel blind. I've tried to be open, but I've built up a wall. I failed to climb over, but succeeded to fall. My friends, this time I'm open. This time I don't lie. I need my serenity, or my friends, I will die. Signed, a recovering addict.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you, the students in the audience, both here and the ones that are from the phone centers. Your questions and your openness are what make this program special. Remember, you can do something about child abuse, and you can make a difference. If you know somebody that is being abused, don't be afraid to listen. And if you are someone that is being afraid, don't be afraid to tell, that is being abused, don't be afraid to tell someone. Because it's your life and you need to take charge. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and see you next time on Student Choices, Student Voices. If you should need help with a problem that seems too difficult to handle, call Teen Line, toll-free for information and referral. That's 1-800-443-8336. 1-800-443-TEEN. You're not alone.
Major funding for Student Voices, Student Choices was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television and the Des Moines Register.
The preceding program was originally broadcast live on November 13, 1989.